Greetings from your Southern Baptist family. I know that you as an entire people group there's a bit of mixed feelings about Victorians as an entire people group at the moment, but I've felt surprisingly welcomed here today. So you're a very gracious mob. Thank you for that. I have had the privilege of meeting and working with quite a number of people within the New South Wales ACT Baptist crew, and for some today it's only the first time I've seen sort of below here, because it's all been online. I'm like, wow, legs, who knew? So that's been exciting for me, but it is just great to be here amongst your gathering and to continue to experience and build that sense of partnership and collaboration. In Victoria, we say that we're together on mission, but we used to say that we were better together, and I think you guys say you're greater together. Is that how it works? So I don't know what happens when you combine better and greater, but I'm here for it. I want to be part of that. I think that's something I want to do. So as Craig mentioned, my role at the BUV is in the area of generations and emerging leaders. And I've been in the role a bit over 4 years now. And I love that I have the privilege of serving and ministering, firstly with this great team at our support hub, but also with the big family of Baptist churches. We've got a little over 250 churches in our crew, and of those, around 100 of them conduct their services in a language other than English, and that's just one way diversity expresses itself in our church family across the state. And so my role is, to engage with them is really varied, and it's stimulating, and it's stretching and challenging, and also an incredible honour. But the kinds of conversations that I've been having with church leaders in our movement are pretty consistent across the board. It's kind of like Craig's mentioned, after 2 years of yo-yoing between, for us in Melbourne, the harshest lockdowns in the country, and then, yes gathering, no gathering, masks on, masks off, vaccination mandates, to Zoom or not to Zoom, and pivot, and then, adjust and pivot again. Our churches are quite exhausted. That's not particular to churches in our state. All businesses and areas of life are experiencing it as well. But in our churches, we're seeing this collective experience of pastoral fatigue, of volunteer stretch, and varying degrees of congregational re-engagement. Anecdotally, sort of the best version of our stats would be that about 60% to 70% of people are returning to on-site services in churches, with the other 30 to 40%, some of them are remaining engaged through online offerings that churches continue to do in that hybrid sense, but there aren't many churches reporting 100% return, and there's some that are right down the other end of that scale. So there's some wistfulness amongst our crew to return to normal. Cast your mind back to 2019. Harp music plays in the background. When we had great plans and step-by-step strategies and ideas and expectations, because we'd never heard of words like, or phrases like, density limits and social distancing and vaccination passports and you're on mute. Seriously, if I had $1. And a rat was a rodent, and when someone sneezed or coughed, we just thought, bad hay fever, right? We didn't But bubbling under the surface somewhere, I believe, is this irrepressible sense that better days are coming, because God has always been in the business of bringing good things out of bad. Of working in and through his people to advance his reign and his rule on the earth, to bring his shalom to the people of the world, to stir up gospel imagination, and to radically transform lives and families and cities with his love. That's not new, but also it hasn't stopped. It hasn't ceased to be true in these recent times. Jesus declared that the gates of hell would not prevail against the building of his church, this ecclesia, the called out people of God, the gathering of his people. And so we know somewhere under the frustration and the depletion and the grief and the loss of this last season, we know God is still at work to build his church. But more than just the same old, just, grit your teeth and just keep doing church kind of thing, what we know about God is that he's a big fan of the new. He likes new things. He's always about doing new things in us, doing new things for us, and doing new things through us. Corinthians 5:17 says, if we are in Christ, we are a new creation. The old is gone and the new is here. Through the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 11, verse 19, God says he will put a new spirit in his people. Lamentations 3:22 talks about the mercies of God being new every morning. Isaiah 42:10 exhorts people to sing a new song to God. Jesus declares a new commandment in John 13:34, and Revelations 21:1 speaks of a new heaven and a new earth. And you get the picture, right? Like, God is about new things, because new equates to life and growth and increasing revelation and refreshed spirits and enlightened hearts and open vision for bigger horizons. Isaiah prophesies along this line when he says, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. God is always up to new things. So amidst the fatigue and the overwhelm and any sort of disappointment we might be carrying into this year, I wonder if the truth of this might pierce through for us today. In fact, I believe we are poised to experience even greater measure of his creative outpouring of new, of his desire to inspire mission, imagination, and kingdom activity in our lives and through our lives to impact the lives of many others. This is our BUV vision and mission, and this has been in place for a few years now, and it hasn't changed pre or post-COVID. We still believe that churches can flourish, that they can make disciples and they can redeem society, be part of God's activity to redeem society, even in this changed and changing environment. We are more than ever committed to encouraging, equipping and empowering our local church leaders for this next season of ministry as churches seek to understand how God desires them to engage in the physical and spiritual community that they've been planted. But it's somewhat paradoxical, I think, for our churches to find themselves carrying this incredible burden of change fatigue, the grief of load, the grief load of congregations that have been through incredible loss, the personal impact for people and the pastoral exhaustion. So it's all sort of weighing on one side. But then there's also this expectancy and this anticipation that this season might actually be affording new opportunities and prospects for new ministry and new missional engagement. God says, behold, I am doing a new thing. So in our time together this morning, I wanted to look at a few biblical and cultural metaphors that might help us as we hold those things in tension and unpack that a little bit more. What is the new thing God is doing? And then what might this new thing require of us? And I start with perhaps a familiar Bible passage from Mark 2 where it says that no one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, otherwise the new piece will pull away from the old, making the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins, otherwise the wine will burst the skins and both the wine and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins. There are two images there that would have had particular relevance to Jesus' original audience, but they can be helpful for us too today. And the first is that picture of cloth. I think the weirdest part of that story for us now might be to get our heads around the idea of mending an old garment. Like in the days of fast fashion and the way our clothes are created, we're just like more likely to replace it than to mend it. But just imagine, if you will, the mending. But you consider well-worn garments that shrunk and they fade and they wear thin, and then grabbing a new patch of fabric and just trying to fix it up. As the text said, that might not work. In fact, it could probably tear on already weakened fabric and the thing would fall apart. And I think the picture here for us is this story of the difficulty of integrating old and new. That's a challenge for us as church and as in our own personal lives, of trying to hobble together some sort of hybrid of old and new. It may not work. That's a tension, a question to ask. But then it goes on to talk about wineskins, and these were made from the hide of an animal, normally a goat. And they stored partially fermented wine in them. And then as the fermentation process continued, it would produce the gas, and that would expand the wineskin and stretch it. And so then you use the wine, drink the wine. And what the saying is, to try and repeat the process with the same wineskin would not be possible because the wineskin is not elastic enough to take another expansion, to handle the gases, and it's likely just to split or pop. So there's all sorts of parallels you can draw from that imagery, but at the very least, I think it's a picture of the challenge, again, that there is in this embracing the new while holding on to the old. But biblical scholars, that's a hard word to say in a rush. Biblical, slow down, Kimmy. Biblical scholars apply this parable in numerous ways, like the need to create new structures or new institutions, and it's the language of being adaptable and flexible and all those sorts of things. But I think that there's value there, but we can't miss the challenge Jesus was bringing not just to structures and systems, but to people, to us, to hearts, to minds, that we would submit ourselves to be new vessels. Elastic enough to allow for his Spirit to stretch and shape and mould us. So new cloth, new wineskins. Another picture for us to unpack comes from the story of King David, very familiar, particularly if you've ever read a children's Bible storybook or if you came through church as a child, is the story when David fights Goliath. And we know that the Israelites are under King Saul, and they were in the battle with the neighbouring Philistine army, which had been going on for a while, and it was a bit of a standstill, and there's an actual giant who's on the other team, and he's big and loud and he's strong and he's scary, and he could lift more in a battle weapon than the Israelites themselves weighed. He's big, and he'd been taunting and intimidating the Israelites. The Bible tells us some of what he says, but I feel like there's a bit of and there's other things going on. I don't know how giants tease, but we'll see. But he says, send one person in, and if they can take me out, our whole nation will become your servants, but if your guy loses, you'll have to serve us. And the Israelites were so scared that they were going to lose and the people of God were going to go into servitude that they didn't even nominate a contender. And so David, he's the young boy, he's not even in the army, but he goes to the battle line to take food to his older brothers, and he hears Goliath once again mocking and ridiculing the Israelites, and he's wondering why the people of God are so afraid. He's like, we can do this, right? God can do this. God's rescued me and protected me in the past. He can surely equip me or someone to take out this guy. And you've got to believe at this moment the Israelites are feeling mocked from without and now within. They've got a teenage boy who has more faith and courage than all of them combined. And so in verse 38 of chapter 17 in 1 Samuel, we see Saul approves David going to fight Goliath, and he dresses him in his battle gear. In his own tunic, he put a coat of armour on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. Now, if you Google images of this verse, you'll find some comical cartoon representations of this tiny child wearing, enormous armour, a helmet that's sort of falling over his eyes, and a tunic that's down to the ground, and a breastplate that's hitting his knees. Who knows how accurate that is? But it's definitely not a stretch to at least imagine it to be ill-fitting, right? This is David. He's a still developing young boy. These things were going to be weighty and cumbersome, and not the stuff he was used to wearing when he was out in the field, and also not something he was going to feel comfortable in going into battle. And I feel like physically and metaphorically, Saul's armour represents something of the old, and David was this picture of the new. David was a new kind of warrior. He was preparing for a different kind of battle. He knew, and we know that in the end, David took Goliath out with a well-executed swing of his slingshot, hitting Goliath between the eyes, the only unprotected part of his body, felling him and allowing David to come close enough to execute him with his own sword, and a little fact that doesn't often show up in the picture storybooks, that he chopped his head off. And the picture's not included. But if God is doing a new thing, if we are looking to new frontiers, to a new and different kind of engagement with a new and different kind of enemy or parameters of war, to this whole new battleground, then we're going to need some new combat strategies. The old armour just might not do the job. As we look deeper into 2022 and beyond, I wonder if we need to consider a whole new way of facing what lies before us. What has changed? How have dynamics altered? What new strategies and ways of thinking does it require of us? Might the old armour not only not serve purpose, because if you think about it, David in the end didn't need to be protected from anything, did he? Like, nothing came towards him. But also, it might impede future progress, because I can't imagine David's rock slinging might have been so on target if he was balancing a helmet and wearing this ill-fitting armour. In 1 Chronicles 12, we see an older David who is king in waiting while the wheels are starting to fall off Saul's kingship. And this band of men begin to assemble around David, all sorts of groups of men volunteering with various offerings of battle equipment and fighting skills. And then in verse 32, there were 200 chiefs from Issachar. And the description of their contribution is that they understood the times and they knew what Israel should do. As important as any tactical or practical response is this ability to see what's happening and to respond accordingly, to know the lay of the land. Who is the opposition? What are our assets? What's the goal? What's the best strategy? What's changed? What's required? Who is best? How is best? When is best? New cloth, new wineskin, new battle plan. And just another final picture for us to ponder. I actually came across this story about 18 months ago, and I was scrolling through a BuzzFeed list of interesting images. And the year is 1998, and the location is a place called Choluteca, which is in the South American country of Honduras. And the Choluteca River flows through the area, and for 2 years, an engineering and construction firm from Japan worked to erect a transport bridge across it. And it connected 2 major road networks and spanned about 300 metres across this river. But in October of 1998, so just at the completion of this bridge, Hurricane Mitch hit the area, causing widespread flooding and devastation. And the rising waters took out the roads either side of the bridge, but the bridge remained intact. However, when the flooding subsided, it turned out the river had carved a new path. Check out this picture. So they were left with a bridge in near perfect condition that no longer had a function. The roads had disappeared and the river had moved. When I first saw this picture, I was just so struck by how powerful a metaphor it was for us as we were and now as we continue to be navigating such change and such transition. The river has moved. Things have changed. I don't know about you and how this fits with the last 2 years of your life, but it so rings true for me in so many different ways personally. The river has moved. I have now a 14-year-old who came to live with me 20 months ago, and that's completely changed a lot, the rhythm and routine of my life. Many friendships have changed in that time. Engagement in church community is altered. My practices of faith and discipline have changed. How I do my job, like when I'm in the office now, or where and when I travel, and what's done remotely and what's done in real life. Like, there's a whole lot of different things to process. Now, some of that's brilliant because we've been opened up to all these opportunities that like the internet, who knew, right? We've sort of started doing a whole lot of things, but there's other ways. I've had to preach. I'm definitely convinced my iPhone is this close to making a response to Jesus, because I have preached to it a lot. I think we're close. I'll let you know how it goes. Pray that one in. But also, things have changed dramatically for who I do my work with or for. For the pastors in our churches, as I said, it's been an exhausting couple of years for our pastoral leaders, and the demands of ministry are next level. People's families' dynamics have changed. How we shop has changed. How we move around our communities has changed. Some of these things have been super positive and life-giving. Others have been quite unwanted and grief-inducing. Some we've seen coming. Others have come as a shock. It's been a lot. And there are as many stories as there are people hearing this message of what has changed and how that change is impacting lives. Where is your river? Where has it moved? Where was it? Where is it going now? And so we might find ourselves with a bridge sort of stuck out in the middle of nowhere, looking like a great bridge. And because they tested it, and It was a great bridge. It withstood the storm and the floods, but it's in the middle of nowhere, and it doesn't serve the purpose for which it was built. It's now an elevated road, essentially, from nowhere to nowhere that no one can access. So what are the questions we can ask about the bridge in the middle of nowhere? Can we just pick the bridge up and move it over and carry on as usual? Or do we need a new bridge for the new conditions of the new direction of the river? Or can we apply the same design principles that we used in the original construction of the bridge? Or do we need new engineering, new types of footing, new construction methods, new materials? I recently used, you preacher, pastor people will appreciate this. I used this metaphor in a sermon, and I had what every preacher dreads when you use an analogy in your sermon, an expert. And he came up, he was a bridge building expert. He was a structural engineer who travels the world consulting on bridge building. And I was like, he was, he told me that, and I was getting ready to say, I'm really sorry that I pretended I knew something that I obviously know nothing about, and humblest apology, bridge man. Like, I was ready for that. But he actually said, this is such a great analogy. It had me thinking of so many things. I was like, oh, thank you. It's good. But take it out of the metaphorical a little bit, and let's try and land this in a place of application for our circumstances today. If things have shifted, as we know they have for everybody to some degree, and the old structures, the old ways, the old thinking, they're not quite cutting it, what do we need to do? And what I love about this picture of the bridge is there's no critique of the bridge. It's 100% perfect for the purpose it was constructed for. It's entirely structurally sound, and often when we look at new things, when we start talking about change or redirection and relevance and moving forward, we can default to starting from a point of being critical about the old. Or it can feel like that's what's happening. We're criticising the old. But this story reminds us that what happens in the past can be completely sound, right, good and appropriate, but it's just not what we need moving forward. It doesn't have to be, that's bad, let's do better. That was great for then. What do we need for where we are now and where we're headed? There may be nothing at all wrong with the ways we've been thinking, acting, believing, preparing and functioning up until now, but if things have changed around us, then all of these behaviours and attitudes possibly need to adjust too. If the attitudes and behaviours and movement of people have changed, then maybe we need to respond to that. If the climate and the culture around us is different, maybe that requires something different from us. If we don't do that thinking, if we don't open ourselves up to the possibility of new things, we might find ourselves quite unprepared for the new thing, out of step with the new direction for our church or our mission, and irrelevant as this bridge is to the purposes and the people we're trying to serve. Behold, I am doing a new thing, says God. In other translations, it says, do you not see it? Or will you not be aware of it? Do you not recognize it? I think there's a chance for us to do an inventory of sorts. What new thing is God up to? What opportunities have been opened up by the changes we've experienced in recent years? What potential is there in the new revelation of new directions and new possibilities? And while you're thinking of that, let me just tell you some of the things that we're seeing in our churches in this current season. One church started a telephone ministry during COVID. How old school is that? Like telephone where you ring people and you talk on it. It's amazing. But I just love it. Like it's kind of launched like this new thing. Have you heard of the telephone, guys? I've got something to introduce to you. Anyway, they started with this list of people from their church, it's a very large church, but they had the list of people who hadn't really engaged in the online space and also who weren't taking up returning to on-site offerings. And they started there and said, let's call them and see what's going on. And the stories of the callees, but also of the callers, of the engagement that took place and is taking place is just brilliant. one of our smaller churches with quite an older congregation, they had, during lockdowns, they'd conducted their service via Zoom in the sense that cameras were on, mics were open, everyone can see everyone, probably just one screen of people, and they were fully engaged. When they returned to meeting on site, there was actually a real dissatisfaction to going back to sitting behind each other in rows and just seeing the back of one another's heads, and they started to complain that we don't get, we want Zoom back because at least we got to see each other and talk to each other. And so they ditched the sanctuary with its, drilled down pews, and they're now meeting in the meeting hall in a circle, so that they can do that sort of interaction and maintain the momentum of personal connection that they developed during those Zoom days. One of our churches, again, quite a larger church in a large municipality, they combined with other churches from other denominations in their area and were the key provider of relief and care into the community during the lockdowns. And their local council recently honoured them with an acknowledgement saying that no one else had contributed more positively to the community during the pandemic or had such a significant impact on the welfare of local citizens. And so they're just going from strength to strength now as a united team of churches. One of our churches, instead of attempting to replicate the normal Sunday morning service online, the live streaming or recording worship and preaching and that sort of stuff, they organised their church into house churches. The desire being that every person would remain connected and pastorally cared for, but also be actively engaged in ongoing discipleship. So Sunday services consisted of utilising recorded music as was appropriate, and then the focus of effort was on delivering a short message and providing some reflecting questions and then letting them meet in their house churches online to work those things through together. But then once on-site gathering was permitted, they didn't want to lose the momentum of those groups. And so now the church does 1 week of whole church gathering, and then the second week they do house churches, and with the encouragement now that they can physically gather. But the same thing happens. They provide resources, provide a little message or something. But some house churches sort of ditch that to just look after each other and to connect relationally, and others will follow that material more diligently. But they've reported a number of new people engaging into their church community because of the diversity of offering there is for people to connect in. Particularly playgroup mothers is something they've noticed. Made anyone who knows the bridge from playgroup to church sometimes is a hard stretch, but they've really seen some engagement, including a couple of people who've made faith commitments. One of our other churches, they recognised that the biggest loss that they felt during the lockdowns and the longing expressed for returning to gatherings was more about connection than content. So they've reconfigured their Sunday morning gatherings. They now have tables and chairs. They do it over a meal, a breakfast, a morning tea or a lunch, and it's a facilitated conversation. They've just totally changed what Sunday church looks like, and again, engaging people in the community, into that space. A number of our churches, as I said earlier, have become awakened to online as an option. The internet, it's amazing, and have used it in different ways. A church that meets in a school hall, it's being sequestered as a polling booth next week, and so normally that means they have to do this massive pick up and move all their gear to another location, and it's a whole, well, now they're just going online, but they're doing watch parties in their houses. So meet with people and watch together. So we're still together but separate, but linking into the same thing. Earlier this year, I was actually scheduled to preach at a church in real life, but there was massive storms that had come through and the roof had actually caved in. And so we just switched straight, like it happened on the Saturday. The message went out and we just jumped online, and I preached in my slippers from home. But you think, previously that would just be churches cancelled, right? You can't, there's not an option, but we've experienced that, or seen that there are. We've seen some momentum of engagement in our micro-church network, our partnership with the city-to-city church planning movement, placemakers and social enterprise endeavours. They've kind of thrived in the lockdown stay local mandates. People are a bit more present in their environment, in their communities, and that's been, they've seen some benefit from that. And in my area of focus, there's actually been an increased interest in leadership development, and I think that's largely driven by the slow volunteer and team return. People are like, we don't have any volunteers, quick, let's train some leaders. And while that might be like, coming to the party a little late, I'm like happy that you came. So I'm like ready to sort of capitalise on that and, have encouraging churches and equipping churches who found they're probably not as deep as they know they could have been in terms of leaders being developed and readied for ministry and community and missional leadership. So whatever the motivation of that, we're excited to see increased focus in churches on the identification, development, and then the deployment of leaders for whatever God intends for us in the new. So some questions for you, for us all, upon reflection. How has the river moved for you in your life, in your family, in your work, in your ministry? What does that look like? And what might God be asking you to do differently as a result? You know, these images of being ready vessels to respond to whatever he wants to do in us. The idea of knowing the times and knowing what to do. You know, even doing the assessment, where is the river now? We're over here on the bridge, but where is the river? Do we even know where it's gone? What opportunities do these changes, this disruption, what does it open up for us? How are we reflecting on the old in a way that honours the old, but also recognises maybe there's some new required? Let me pray for us. God, you are a good and generous God, and it is just this incredible gift to us that you include us in your ministry and mission, that you invite us to partner with you in what you're up to on the earth, that you use us as your voice and your hands and your feet to communicate your hope and truth and light to the world. God, would you continue to just stir that sense of desire for your kingdom to come on earth, that we would be pursuing the things of you, that we would be allowing you to unsettle us as you need to, that would continue to be a passion that burns in us. But God, as we look at the landscape of a very changed world, a changed experience, a difficult season that we've traversed, and with implications still carrying on, God, when we look at that, we still want to be those you would choose to use to communicate your message of hope, truth, and light to the world. We still want to be ready to respond to the invitation to partner with you. And so, God, do what you need to do in each of us to make that preparation sure. And would you find us faithful and obedient to that? Would you find us humble and open-minded to really consider what is the reality of the new space that we find ourselves in, and what might you want to do with us, in us, through us because of it? And God, we're excited to see the lives transformed, the community and families impacted, God, the incredible spread of your gospel, of your truth, as you find people ready and willing to engage in what it is that you're asking of us. As your Spirit does the work of transforming us, so that we are ready to just respond to whatever it is that you're asking of us and wherever it is you might lead us. God, we love you, and we are so grateful that you have revealed yourself to us and that we know your love for us. And we look forward to all that you might do across the Baptist churches of this state, and through that into all aspects of life and all other spaces of hurt and need. And we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.